Hi everyone. So in this lesson, we are going to be talking about 10 economic principles. And so they break down into 4 different parts. First, you have your 4 market measures. There's personal choice, voluntary exchange, freedom to enter and compete, and the rule of law. There's also what's called the 4 S's, which are scarcity, self-interest, subjective value, and sunk cost. Then there's 2 parts that are what's known as Ricardo's law, which talk about comparative advantage and opportunity cost. So we're going to start off with the 4 S's. Now, if entrepreneurship is solving problems for a profit, then these 4 economic concepts help us better understand what the problem is and what our opportunities are. They help answer the question, is it worth it? So the first one is scarcity. Now, this is the gap between limited resources, time, attention, money, and the unlimited wants and needs for that resource. This is the basic study of economics. Because everything is scarce, everyone is forced to make decisions about how to deal with that scarcity. You want to think about think about resources that aren't scarce, and you probably find that you aren't able to come up with any. It's not just about physical goods and services that are scarce, but truly all resources. Um, you need to remember that time is the scarcest resource, and you can't go back in time. You can't buy time. You can't find ways to save time by doing other things. So let's take a closer. Let's take um, So let's take a look at the 3 most basic scarcest resources. First is time. You are You are constantly spending it. You can't get time back. There's no way to get it. You can't go back in time and do it over again. Next is attention, and attention is scarce because we all have to give attention to someone. Everyone wants it from someone else. And then money is scarce because it can be exchanged for any other resource, and it takes effort to get more money. Think back about time. The clock is always ticking when it comes to stop. It's one thing you have to spend, even if you're doing nothing. And when it comes to attention, really, what is it that everyone wants from others? When you're thinking, if you're a student, what do your teachers typically want? They want you to pay them, right? And as far as money, in the market, we typically trade time and attention for money. We spend money to buy the time of others or time for ourselves. Entrepreneurs, they've got to work to get and keep attention before they can get your time and your money. Now, the next concept is self-interest. So this is acting to seek the maximum personal benefit, knowing that some of those actions might also benefit others or improve society. Self-interest is the next one. It is important to remember that self-interest is different from being selfish. I'll say that again. Self-interest is different than being selfish. Think about, what do I want? What do others want? This helps develop the idea of self-interest versus selfishness. And voluntary exchange, which we'll talk about later in this lesson, is what helps us get what we want and what we need without harming others in the process. Then there's also subjective value. This is accepting that each of us, we prioritize different things for different reasons and at different times and in different contexts. Think about your favorite pizza toppings. Now, some people are team pepperoni. They love pepperoni. Others, they don't like pepperoni at all. This is subjective value at its lowest level. People like different things for different reasons, and that's okay. Continuing on with subjective value, it's using knowledge that you have about others when making decisions about their subjective value, especially your customers. How will your customers feel about this? How do I want them to feel? You might like pizza, and you might want to sell pizza, but if people don't like pizza, they're not going to buy from you. You won't have any sales. When entrepreneurs look for problems to solve, they naturally gravitate toward their own problems, and that's an okay place to start. But you should try to think about outside of yourself as an entrepreneur. This is how you grow as an entrepreneur. And the only way to grow is to get to know your customer as well as you possibly can. This is where market research comes in so that you can learn about the subjective value of your target market. Now, finally, the fourth S is sunk costs. These are spent resources and costs of time, attention, and money that are unrecoverable, that you can't get back. Remember that costs don't always mean money. They don't always mean dollars and cents. You incur costs of time every day, for example. You want to, as when you're thinking like an entrepreneur, you're seeking knowledge about your customer. You have assumptions about what they want, what they'll trade, what they'll buy from you. But the instant that you realize your assumptions are off, you need to pivot. You need to make a change. And this is naturally difficult because we've put our hearts, our souls, our blood, our sweat, and tears into it. But pivoting is okay if it benefits the customer because it can end up earning you more money at the time. Marketing, never mind, we'll go on to that. So again, thinking about sunk costs, when you are making decisions, look for opportunities in the future based on what you've learned from the past. Don't dwell on resources lost in the past. Think about instead new possibilities going forward. One of the questions that entrepreneurs very often ask themselves is, how can I test my assumption? And test my assumptions. It takes a great deal of humility that you could be wrong. But it's so much cheaper to build a minimum viable product, an MVP, take it to market, measure how your assumptions line up, and then learn from that, and then pivot if you have to. Change a little, change a lot. Don't be afraid to punt. Success will come faster and it will come cheaper that way. Remember how scarce the resources are. The longer you wait to pivot when there's a reason, then when there, the longer you wait to pivot when there is a reason to means you are wasting more scarce resources. Everyone experiences sunk costs. Just remember to keep that in the back of your mind. Learn from your past so that you can be more successful in the future going forward. All right, let's shift gears. We're going to talk about the 4 market measures. Now, these 4 elements either encourage or discourage entrepreneurial in any market. It could be a classroom, it could be your business, it could be your community, your state, your country, whatever. These 4 principles that we're going to talk about are holistic. They are a person's natural entrepreneurial behaviors to either thrive or to not succeed, to wither, depending on how your market is set up. Now, the 4 market measures are from a group that's been studying human flourishing since the 1970s. Through their work, they've been able to see direct correlations between these 4 market measures and how individual countries either help their citizens or hurt them. They come from something called the Fraser Institute, which is a completely nonpartisan think tank that's been tracking these 4 elements on a country by country basis since 1976. So first one is personal choice. This is understanding that an individual and no one else is accountable for their own decisions, behaviors, and actions. Think about in your own life. How many times have you been allowed to make choices in your own life? In school, in extracurricular activities, at work, at home, in your plan for the future? To what degree have you been held accountable so far, and to what degree are you going to be held accountable for your own decisions? Um, Personal choice, you have to remember, is that your preferences drive your decisions and they drive your behaviors. When you have buy-in and you take charge of your choices, you feel more in control of whatever situation. It is your freedom to choose that will vary based upon the situations. Next is voluntary exchange. This is the trading of goods, the ideas, etc., services that is motivated when participants see a greater value in what they gain versus what they lose. Voluntary exchange is where both parties believe that they are getting something more valuable than what they are giving up. Otherwise, they wouldn't trade. This helps to avoid coercive behavior in the market. Think about going into a grocery store. Okay, when you walk in as a consumer, you go in to buy a bag of chocolate. Okay, you're entering into this market saying that you value the bag of chocolate more than you value the money that you will spend on the bag of chocolate. And on the flip side, the store values the money that they're getting more than they value the bag of chocolate sitting on its shelf. So once the chocolate and the money have been exchanged, that's a win-win situation for both parties. That's voluntary exchange. Otherwise, you wouldn't, if there wasn't that assumption, assuming any other rational choice, you wouldn't trade. You have to value one thing more than the thing that you're giving up. This next market measure is the freedom to enter and compete. Remember that it is the choice of all parties in a voluntary exchange whether or not they want to participate in the market or not. Remember, choice and all parties. Okay, it's a voluntary exchange. Um, Think about this. How often have you been excluded from an opportunity? How many are on a sports roster? If you play basketball, there can only be 5 players on the court for a team at a time. Baseball is 9. Football, it's 11, right? What's the reasons for those limits? Well, you have the ability to choose whether you're going to participate or not. So when you have the freedom to enter and compete, remember that the more open the market, the more entrepreneurship there is, there's more innovation, the more competition, and very often the more solutions can exist. We want to engage in a free and open market. The nuance of this concept is that we all have that freedom to choose or compete or not to compete, not to enter the market. Sometimes there's barriers, there are limits that exist to limit the number of participants from a market. Think about how those barriers hinder the possibilities of a market. For example, you might have the desire to go play basketball or be on the cheer or the dance team. No one should force you to have to do those things. It's up to you. You have that choice. You don't If you're not a willing participant, there's no reason for it. Now, you might be barriers, like you might have to audition for, or you might have to do a tryout to get on one of those teams or to get into a play, but you should have the option to participate and try it if you'd like to. Okay, that's your choice with freedom to enter and compete. Next is something called the rule of law. This is believing that all conditions policies apply equally to all people at all times without exception. Very often we are acutely aware of inequality. We are quick to call out lack of fairness. But yes, the world is not fair, and yes, people tend to not treat others equally. The rule of law is only theoretically possible, kind of equality under the law. The opposite to the rule of law is the rule of man. Think about a school or a classroom. How much of it is set up as a command and control environment? To create more entrepreneurs, humans need to know that they will be treated equally under the law or the rules of the game. If not, they'll revolt. And it may not be a grand televised revolution or revolt. It might not even be visible. But having clear, easy to understand rules and laws that are applied equally is one easy way to get more entrepreneurship in a school, in a home, in your community, in the world. Entrepreneurs are highly susceptible to laws that they may not normally encounter as a consumer. Rules are designed to keep consumers safe. Understanding the rule of law in the decisions of entrepreneurs can help with sound judgment and strategy. So the rule of law, it allows people to put their resources into creating value instead of protecting themselves from those who might otherwise look to undermine the peace and civility. Think of private property rights as an example. Why are those important? Okay, what kinds of laws or rules govern your school that might not apply at your house, or vice versa? What happens in laws or rules aren't followed by everyone fairly? How does that impact the market in both consumers and producers? These are things to think about. Finally, let's talk about Ricardo's law. Remember the basic principles of economics: scarcity forces trade-off in the market. So when it comes to Ricardo's law, there's a thing called opportunity cost. This is recognizing the highest foregone conclusion versus a complete set of alternatives when a choice is made. One thing that can trip us up is the idea that there is more than one opportunity cost. Sometimes we think opportunity cost is all of the possible things that we could have done but didn't do. But Ricardo's law only forces us with two choices. My pen is apparently not working. What if we try a different color? Nope, two choices. Nope, still not working. Oh well. But Ricardo's law forces us to compare only two things, the two most valuable things. And the one that we don't choose, that's our opportunity cost. Remember, that doesn't always mean money. Your opportunity cost could be the time it takes you to do a task. If I do X, what is the most valuable thing that I am giving up? Think about this. If you choose to go to a party instead of studying, but you still plan to study later, well, you're trading the fun of the party, of going to the party, with the relative pain of studying later with with your future self. Remember our three basic resources: time, attention, and money. Peter Drucker had a famous quote who then said, "There are no solutions, only trade-offs." Next is something called comparative advantage. This is matching the one individual or group to the activity for which they are best suited or they're most capable of executing. Comparative advantage is different than competitive advantage, and it's also different than something called absolute advantage. Remember this differentiation. Comparative advantage is about having the lowest cost of production. Competitive advantage is about having the highest value. A company can have both. They can both have both comparative and competitive, and in fact, comparative advantage is one of the two ways to have a competitive advantage, but it's not the only way. An absolute advantage is where you can do everything at a better, lower cost, higher value, etc. You might have an absolute advantage over your entire group, but scarcity dictates that there are opportunity costs for everything, and a company or person with an absolute advantage really isn't immune to this. Most of the time, if they focus on their comparative advantage and then trade with someone else for the rest, everyone is better off. Comparative advantage encourages specialization and cooperation. So when it comes to comparative advantage, you want to focus on the thing for which you have the comparative advantage, trade with someone else for the rest, then everybody is better off. And remember that comparative advantage encourages specialization and cooperation in the market. In the market, you should specialize on the tasks that you have the lowest opportunity cost in, even if you can still do something else really well. If someone can do that same task as you in less time, then they should be doing that, and you can focus on other tasks. And so really that's our lesson about the 10 economic principles. There's the four S's, the four market measures, and Ricardo's law, which talks about opportunity cost and comparative advantage.